Have you ever been invisible to the same people who once hung on your every word? James Wright's hands moved in practice circles across the polished marble floor of Titan Capital's executive boardroom, the cleaning rag squeaking rhythmically in the pre-dawn silence. 5:45 a.m. The city still dark beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan's towers reduced to scattered constellations of office lights against black sky. He worked methodically, muscle memory guiding each motion while his mind drifted elsewhere, always elsewhere these days, to hospital bills and oxygen concentrators and the soft wheeze of his daughter's labored breathing. The reflection staring back at him from the gleaming stone bore little resemblance to the man he'd been. 7 years collapsed the distance between then and now into something that felt simultaneously infinite and razor-thin. Gray janitor's uniform where tailored Armani once hung, chemical-roughened hands that had once moved hundreds of millions with keystrokes, dark circles beneath eyes that had seen patterns in chaos, fortunes in data streams, futures in numbers. A flicker of memory surfaced unbidden. Younger James in a corner office, shaking hands with Goldman Sachs' CEO, cameras flashing, the intoxicating rush of having conquered the unconquerable. The memory dissolved as quickly as it came, leaving only the squeak of his rag and the faint hum of climate control systems. His phone vibrated against his thigh. He pulled it out with still damp hands, read the text from Maggie Rodriguez. Lily struggling to breathe this morning, mijo. Oxygen at 86%. Should I call Dr. Hayes? The rag stopped moving. James stared at the screen, jaw clenched, throat tight. 86%, still above the threshold where insurance would deem the surgery medically necessary rather than elective. Still in the zone where his daughter slowly suffocated while bureaucrats consulted actuarial tables. He typed back, "Keep monitoring. If it drops below 85%, call him. I'll be home by 8. The phone disappeared back into his pocket. He forced his hands to resume their work, pushed the panic down into that locked compartment where he kept everything he couldn't afford to feel during work hours. Survival meant compartmentalization. Survival meant moving forward even when every instinct screamed to run home, scoop Lily into his arms, demand the universe explain why it kept taking everything he loved. The trash bin near the wet bar caught his attention. He crossed to it, began emptying its contents into his rolling cart, a discarded Starbucks cup, crumpled napkins. And there, several pages of dense technical documentation, the Skyborne Defense Corporation logo visible on the header. Someone had tried to tear them in half, but given up partway through. James smoothed the papers absently, old habits surfacing. Supply chain manifests, quarterly projections, the kind of documents that were supposed to be shredded, not tossed in regular waste. His eyes scanned the numbers without conscious intention, pattern recognition firing automatically. Malaysian subsidiary, chip suppliers, a name he didn't recognize, Nextcore Solutions. Shipping weights that seemed... He stopped himself. Not your world anymore, not your problem. Just empty the trash and move on. But the numbers wouldn't release him. Weight discrepancies, tiny, almost imperceptible, but there. The kind of rounding error that meant nothing to an accountant and everything to an engineer. 0.4 grams difference between spec and actual. Consumer-grade silicon masquerading as aerospace grade. At operational speeds, at altitude, the thermal tolerances would... James folded the papers and slipped them into his cart beneath a layer of garbage. Whatever Skyborne Defense was doing, whatever corners they were cutting, it wasn't his concern. He was a janitor. Janitors cleaned. They didn't analyze supply chains or calculate thermal failure points or predict which multi-billion-dollar deals were ticking time bombs. 7 years ago, I moved $800 million with a single algorithm. Today, I make $16 an hour scrubbing floors, but in 90 seconds, that's about to change forever. The boardroom began filling at 6:50. James had learned to make himself small, invisible, a piece of furniture that breathed but didn't matter. They filed in with their $1,000 suits and their Harvard MBAs, voices carrying the easy confidence of people who'd never had to choose between medication and rent. Never held their child's hand in an emergency room while insurance claims were denied in real time. Victoria Sterling entered last. She always did the power play of making everyone wait. 34 years old and already legendary on Wall Street. The woman who'd rebuilt her father's gutted firm from ashes, who'd turned personal tragedy into an empire, who moved through the financial world like a blade through silk. Ice blue eyes that never blinked enough. A reputation for eviscerating competitors with surgical precision. James kept his head down, focused on wiping already clean surfaces. Just another piece of scenery. Victoria took her seat at the table's head, spreading files before her with crisp efficiency. 12 executives filled the remaining chairs. Michael Hartford, the COO, sat to her right, perpetually sweating despite the aggressive air conditioning, fingers drumming nervous patterns on the mahogany. Christopher Cooper, VP of something or other, lounged to her left with the smug certainty of someone who'd never faced real consequences. The meeting began without preamble. Victoria's voice cut through the room like tempered steel. Gentlemen, today we don't merely acquire Skyborne Defense Corporation, we conquer it. Approving murmurs rippled around the table. Harrison Blake thinks his former protege lacks the spine for hostile takeovers. He's wrong. Michael leaned forward, eager. Skyborne's trading at 48. We offer 57. They'll fold by 3 p.m. Victoria's correction came swift and cold. Offer 54. I want Harrison Blake to feel the knife when he signs. 6 years ago, Harrison Blake was my father's partner and my mentor. He systematically stole our clients, our strategies, then launched a competing firm and left us bankrupt. My father died of a heart attack 3 months later. Today I take Harrison's crown jewel. Today he learns that betrayal has a price, and I'm here to collect with interest. James squeezed cleaning solution onto the sidebar, began wiping away a coffee ring that someone had left. The rag squeaked. In the momentary silence between one executive's comment and another's response, the sound cut through like nails on glass. Victoria's head turned slowly. Her eyes found him, really saw him, for the first time. Excuse me. Her voice carried that particular tone of aristocratic irritation, the kind that suggested his very existence was an affront to proper order. Are you aware you're interrupting a $4.3 billion conversation with squeaking sounds? James froze mid-wipe, kept his eyes down. Apologies, Ms. Sterling, I'll leave immediately. He reached for his cart. No. The single word stopped him cold. He looked up despite himself, met those ice-blue eyes. Something in her expression had shifted. Not softening exactly, but sharpening into focus. A predator spotting unexpected movement. A smile played at the corners of her mouth, the kind that didn't reach anywhere else. Sit down. Christopher started to object. Victoria, we have SEC compliance filings to— Quiet, Christopher. She gestured to the empty chair at the table's far end. The shame seat, where underperforming analysts were made to sit while their failures were dissected for the room's education and entertainment. James had cleaned enough boardrooms to know the symbolism. Boredom. That's what this was. Victoria Sterling was bored with her guaranteed victory, bored with her sycophantic executives, and had decided a janitor would make suitable sport to pass the time before the real work began. James thought about Lily, about the surgery scheduled for Thursday that would be canceled if he lost this job, about Maggie Rodriguez watching his daughter struggle to breathe, about the stack of medical bills on his kitchen table, each one stamped with red ink that screamed denied or collections or final notice. He walked to the chair, sat on its edge, gray janitor's uniform a violent splash of wrong against the sea of Italian wool and silk ties. Victoria leaned forward, resting her chin on one perfectly manicured hand. The gesture would have seemed casual if not for the calculation in her eyes. Your name? James Wright. Well, James Wright, we are about to purchase Skyborne Defense Corporation for significant capital. She waved dismissively at the executives around the table. My team here, Harvard, Wharton, the finest business schools money can buy, believes it's a guaranteed success. Christopher whispered something to the analyst beside him, just loud enough to carry. Perhaps we should ask him whether we should invest in lottery tickets instead. Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. Victoria's smile widened fractionally. But you have what we might call a ground-level perspective. Since you're sitting at my table, you must have some opinion. Impress me, James. Tell me what I should do with $4.3 billion. This was the punchline setup. This was where he was supposed to stammer, mumble something about not knowing, maybe crack a joke about buying gold or Bitcoin or whatever the common man thought rich people did with money. This was where he was supposed to confirm everything they already believed about the natural hierarchy, about who belonged in rooms like this and who existed to clean them. But something in James shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was rage. Maybe it was the memory of those papers in his cart, those tiny weight discrepancies that his brain couldn't stop calculating. Maybe it was simply that he'd already lost everything that mattered, and there was a certain freedom in having nothing left to protect. The tired janitor expression drained from his face like water. His posture straightened. Years of forced subservience fell away, replaced by something older, sharper, more dangerous. The ghost of who he'd been before the world broke him. He stood, walked to the windows overlooking the still dark Manhattan skyline. When he turned back, his voice had changed completely. No longer the deferential murmur of service workers everywhere, steel wrapped in silk. Don't buy Skyborne. The room erupted. Michael slapped the table, laughing. Brilliant! The janitor says no! Perhaps he has insider information from the other janitorial staff. Someone else offered, prompting fresh laughter. Victoria raised one hand. Silence fell instantly. She studied James with renewed interest, the way a chess master might study an unexpected move from a supposedly weak opponent. And why is that, James? Bad feelings? Unfavorable horoscope? James held her gaze, didn't blink. Because Harrison Blake isn't selling you a company, Ms. Sterling. He's selling you a crime scene. The laughter died. Christopher half rose from his chair. Who the hell are you? Security! Victoria's hand shot out, gripping Christopher's wrist hard enough to make him wince. Sit down! She released him, never breaking eye contact with James. Let him speak. I want to hear the punchline. James moved to the whiteboard mounted on the wall, picked up a marker. His hands were steady now, muscle memory from 1,000 presentations in rooms not so different from this one, back when people paid 7 figures to hear his analysis. You're examining Skyborne's Q3 earnings, correct? Specifically the government contracts for their Aegis drone guidance systems. That's the acquisition's crown jewel, worth $2.1 billion alone. Victoria's eyes narrowed fractionally. That information was public but obscure, buried in technical documentation that most investors skimmed rather than absorbed. The Aegis system passed DoD preliminary testing last month, she said slowly, testing. The Aegis system doesn't work, Christopher scoffed. That's absurd. They passed comprehensive tests. The documentation is ironclad. James didn't look at him, kept his focus on Victoria, on the only person in this room whose opinion actually mattered. They passed static ground tests, different thing entirely. Check their supply chain manifest from the last 6 months. Specifically, raw material imports from their Malaysian subsidiary. He wrote on the whiteboard, NextCore Solutions. They switched chip suppliers in May. Shell company called NextCore Solutions. Check the shipping weights. A second number appeared beneath the first, 0.4 grams. NextCore chips are 0.4 grams lighter than military specification requirements. That doesn't sound like much. It's a rounding error to most people. but it means they're using consumer-grade silicon instead of aerospace-grade. Different thermal tolerances. Third number, 450 degrees Fahrenheit/Mach 2/6 seconds. At Mach 2 operational speed, these chips will hit 450 degrees Fahrenheit in 6 seconds. The guidance systems will fail catastrophically. The Department of Defense will cancel the entire contract within 90 days of your acquisition completion, probably sooner once they run full-spectrum testing. He tossed the marker. It rolled across the polished table, struck Victoria's coffee cup with a sharp clink that rang in the silence like a bell. James's voice dropped, became almost gentle, the kind of gentleness that accompanied delivering terminal diagnoses. Harrison Blake knows this. That's why he's not fighting your hostile takeover. He's not capitulating, Ms. Sterling. He's escaping. He's handing you a grenade with the pin already pulled, and he'll be safely on a beach somewhere when it detonates in your hands. Absolute silence filled the boardroom. Outside, the first hints of dawn began painting the eastern sky in shades of gray. James could hear his own heartbeat, hear the faint whistle of the building's ventilation system, hear Michael Hartford's suddenly ragged breathing. Victoria stared at him, not with the amused condescension from before, but with something approaching shock. Her knuckles had gone white where they gripped the edge of the table. It wasn't just what he'd said, it was the specificity. The casual way he'd cited shipping weights and thermal failure points in DoD testing protocols. The surgical precision with which he'd dismantled the deal everyone in this room had spent months analyzing and approving. This wasn't a lucky guess. This wasn't some janitor who'd overheard executives talking and misunderstood fragments. This was forensic accounting married to aerospace engineering, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Michael found his voice first, though it wavered. He's lying, just reading headlines and making educated guesses. James turned to him, expression mild. Verify it. Ms. Sterling has data room access to Skyborne's internal documentation. Folder 4, subfolder Logistics. May 12th supplier manifest. Search for Next Core Solutions. Victoria didn't hesitate. Her fingers flew across her laptop keyboard, executive nails clicking rapid fire against keys. She navigated through password-protected directories, through layers of confidential documentation that had cost Titan's legal team months to access. James provided directions without being asked. Folder 4, subfolder Logistics. She found the file, opened it. Her eyes scanned columns of technical specifications, shipping records, supplier invoices, the kind of data that would make most people's eyes glaze over, the forest of numbers that hid individual trees. But James knew exactly which tree to look for, and Victoria was sharp enough to see it once he'd pointed the way. May 12th, 2024. Supplier, Next Core Solutions. Item, Guidance Processor Chips Aegis Mark 7. Quantity 50,000 units, weight per unit 2.3 grams. Specification requirement 2.7 grams, 0.4 grams difference, a rounding error, a clerical mistake. Nothing, unless you understood what it meant. Victoria's face drained of color. She looked up at James, and for the first time since entering the room, genuine emotion cracked through her Ice Queen facade. Not anger, something more primal, fear. How? The word came out barely above a whisper. How could you possibly know this? James picked up his cleaning bucket. The posture slumped again, the dangerous light in his eyes dimming back to exhausted resignation. The transformation was so complete, so immediate, that several executives blinked as if they'd imagined the last 5 minutes. I read the trash, Ms. Sterling. You people throw away considerable amounts of paper, and I used to be good at math. He pushed his cart toward the door. Victoria stood so fast her chair toppled backward, the crash echoing like a gunshot. Wait! Who are you? James paused at the doorway, didn't turn around. His hand rested on the brass handle, and for just a moment his fingers trembled. I'm just the guy who cleans up messes, Ms. Sterling. Good luck with your merger. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Victoria stood frozen, breathing hard. The room remained silent, every executive afraid to be the first to speak, to break whatever spell had just been woven and shattered. Michael cleared his throat. Should I call security? Have them detain him for... Get Harrison Blake on the phone. Victoria's voice had gone flat, all affect stripped away. Now, and get aerospace engineering consultants on retainer. I want independent verification of every technical specification in that data room within 2 hours. Victoria, surely we don't need to... Now! The room exploded into motion. Executives grabbed phones, barked orders to assistants, pulled up documents on laptops. The machine Victoria had built ground into emergency action, responding to the first real threat it had faced since its creation. But Victoria herself stood motionless at the window, staring at the spot where James Wright had disappeared, her mind racing through implications and contingencies and the terrifying realization that she'd just been saved from financial apocalypse by a man in a janitor's uniform. 36 hours later, the fallout was nuclear. Victoria Sterling held a press conference at 9 a.m. on Thursday morning. Behind her, the Titan Capital logo gleamed on a wall of polished steel. Before her, 36 financial journalists leaned forward with recorder apps extended. After extensive technical review by independent aerospace engineering consultants, Titan Capital is withdrawing its acquisition offer for Skyborne Defense Corporation, effective immediately. Our due diligence has uncovered material misrepresentations regarding supply chain integrity that render the acquisition untenable. The questions came rapid fire. Victoria answered with clinical precision, revealing just enough to make the story explosive without exposing Titan to liability. By noon, the SEC had announced a formal investigation. By market close Friday, Skyborne's stock had cratered from $48 to $10.50. The board of directors held an emergency session Friday night. By Saturday morning, Harrison Blake had been terminated as CEO and banned from company premises pending criminal investigation. Forbes ran a digital cover, "The Untouchable, Victoria Sterling Dodges $4 billion disaster." The Wall Street Journal led with, "How did Sterling see what everyone missed?" Bloomberg's headline read, "The sharpest mind on Wall Street strikes again." But Victoria Sterling felt no triumph, just a gnawing, obsessive need to understand. 10:20 p.m. Friday night, her corner office on the 47th floor. The city spread below like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Michael Hartford paced in front of her desk, scotch in hand, trying to project calm he clearly didn't feel. "He doesn't exist, Victoria. I had HR pull every file. There's no record of anyone named James Wright ever working for Prestige Maintenance Services. Maybe it's some kind of savant situation. Goodwill hunting in a janitor's uniform. Send a fruit basket, move on." Victoria didn't respond. She stared at the grainy security camera photo on her screen. James Wright entering the service elevator, face half turned away, features indistinct. But even in the low-resolution image, something radiated from him. Intelligence. Intensity. The unmistakable posture of someone who'd once commanded rooms rather than cleaned them. A man with that level of intellect doesn't scrub floors for $16 an hour. Her voice was quiet, almost talking to herself. He identified correlation between shipping weights and thermal dynamics in seconds. That's not a party trick. That's an elite skill set built over years. Michael shrugged, poured himself more Macallan. "So? He saved us $4 billion. We're done here." I tried thanking him. Victoria looked up. "Called Prestige Maintenance to offer a bonus. Know what they told me?" Michael stopped pacing. "They fired him. The moment he left this building Tuesday morning, his supervisor terminated him for unauthorized client interaction. He's vanished. Phone disconnected. The address on file is an unpaid P.O. box in the Bronx that hasn't been checked in 3 months." She stood, walked to the windows. Manhattan glittered with Friday night life. Restaurants, bars, apartments where normal people lived normal lives, unburdened by the weight of nearly destroying everything they'd built. Find him, Michael. Hire Kroll Investigations. I don't care what it costs. I want to know who James Wright is, where he came from, and why someone who can dismantle a defense contractor with a glance is emptying my trash bins. Victorious. That's not a request. Michael recognized the tone. He'd heard it enough times to know when argument was futile. He drained his scotch and left without another word. Victoria remained at the window long after he'd gone, staring at her own ghost-pale reflection in the glass, trying to ignore the voice in her head that kept whispering the same question. What if he'd said nothing? What if he'd just emptied the trash and moved on? You would have signed the deal. You would have been destroyed, $4.3 billion up in smoke. The firm bankrupted. Your father's legacy erased twice over. All because you were too arrogant to see the trap Harrison Blake had laid. And the only reason you're still standing is because a janitor you were mocking for sport decided to save you anyway. The debt she owed felt crushing, unpayable. And Victoria Sterling had built her entire identity around never owing anyone anything. 3 days later, Thomas Miller arrived at her office carrying a thick blue dossier. 68 years old, former FBI, now running the most expensive private investigation firm in Manhattan. He looked grim in a way that made Victoria's stomach tighten. You were right, Ms. Sterling. He set the dossier on her desk. James Wright is not a janitor. Or rather, he is now, but that's not what he was. The first page made Victoria's breath catch. A Wall Street Journal article from 2016 yellowed slightly at the edges where it had been photocopied from microfiche. Anonymous quant predicts Brexit crash. Clients make fortune. The photograph showed a younger man in an impeccable Brioni suit, face turned slightly away from the camera but unmistakable. The same sharp cheekbones, the same intense eyes, though without the exhaustion that now carved lines around them. Miller narrated as Victoria flipped through the pages, her hands moving faster with each revelation. James Michael Wright, born 1992, Baltimore. Graduated MIT age 19 with double major in applied mathematics and computer science. PhD in quantitative finance from MIT at 21. Started an independent hedge fund out of a Brooklyn basement in 2013. More articles, more photographs, the paper trail of a rising star who'd burned bright enough to leave scorch marks. He created something called the Phoenix algorithm. Nobody knows exactly how it works. He never published the methodology, but in June 2016 it predicted the Brexit pound collapse 48 hours before the referendum results came in. His clients made $400 million overnight. Victoria felt ice spreading through her chest. She remembered Phoenix. Everyone in finance remembered Phoenix. It had been legend, myth, ghost story. The algorithm that could see around corners, that predicted market movements with supernatural accuracy. Half the quants on Wall Street had spent years trying to reverse engineer it from public trading data. None had succeeded. Net worth hit $180 million by age 25. Miller's voice was carefully neutral, the way doctors sounded when delivering diagnoses they knew would shatter lives. Then, 2019, his wife Sarah was diagnosed with glioblastoma, grade 4 brain cancer. She was 8 months pregnant at the time. The dossier included medical records that Miller's team had acquired through means Victoria decided not to examine too closely. Diagnosis, prognosis, a death sentence delivered in clinical terminology. James liquidated everything trying to save her, sold his brownstone in Brooklyn, his cars, closed the hedge fund, and cashed out all positions. Experimental immunotherapy in Switzerland, cutting-edge radiation treatment in Tokyo. He spent $163 million over 26 months. It bought her 18 extra months of life. A photograph from a hospital corridor, clearly taken without permission. James Wright holding an infant. Lily, Victoria assumed, while his wife lay unconscious in the bed behind him. The expression on his face was something Victoria had no words for. Grief and love and desperate hope all compressed into something that looked like physical pain. Sarah Wright died August 2021. By then, the money was completely gone. Medical bills alone topped $80 million. James was left with crushing debt and a daughter born with congenital heart valve defect, another expensive ongoing condition. Miller pulled out more documents. Employment applications, all stamped rejected. Credit reports showing financial freefall. Eviction notices, collection agency letters. He's blacklisted from major financial institutions. When he closed his fund to care for Sarah, he broke multiple contracts. Industry considers him emotionally unreliable and a flight risk. Nobody will touch him. The final page in the dossier was a lease agreement for a rent-controlled apartment in the South Bronx. $600 monthly for a studio that Victoria suspected violated multiple building codes. Current employment: Prestige Maintenance Services, terminated Tuesday. Before that, 3 other janitorial firms, all short-term positions. He works multiple jobs trying to cover his daughter's medical expenses. State insurance denied the surgery she needs because they classify it as elective until her oxygen saturation drops below 80%. Victoria closed the dossier with hands that had started to shake. She recognized what she was feeling and hated it. Pity. Empathy. The creeping realization that James Wright had lost everything that mattered, had sacrificed an empire for love, and somehow still had the strength to save someone who'd been mocking him for entertainment. He wasn't volatile, she said quietly. He was loyal. Miller nodded. Most loyal man I've ever investigated. Spent a fortune buying his wife 18 extra months. Now he's doing the same for his daughter, one $16 an hour shift at a time. Victoria stood, grabbed her coat from the hook behind her desk. Thank you, Thomas. Send the invoice to my personal account, not the firm. Where are you going? She paused at the door. To pay a debt and to make an investment. The hallway of the apartment building in the South Bronx smelled like boiled cabbage, stale cigarette smoke, and something Victoria couldn't identify, but suspected was mold. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead with the maddening, irregular rhythm of failing ballasts. Cracked linoleum peeled up at the corners, creating trip hazards that spoke to years of deferred maintenance. Victoria Sterling, in her $3,800 Burberry trench coat and Louboutin heels, moved through this landscape like an alien visiting a hostile planet. She'd grown up with money, even before rebuilding her father's firm. She'd been insulated from this kind of poverty her entire life, had understood it as an abstract statistical category rather than a lived reality of mold and flickering lights, and the constant fear of eviction. Apartment 3F. The number hung crooked on the door, one screw missing, ready to fall at the slightest provocation. She knocked, a male voice muffled by the door. Go away, Mr. Ramirez. I'll have the rent Tuesday. Victoria kept her voice level. It's not the landlord, James. Silence, long enough that she wondered if he'd simply decided to ignore her. Then the sound of a chain sliding, a deadbolt turning. The door cracked open 3 inches. James Wright looked worse than he had in the boardroom. Stained t-shirt that had once been white. Unshaven, hair uncombed, eyes bloodshot from either crying or insomnia or both. The transformation from the man who'd commanded that room was so complete it was almost painful to witness. His voice came out flat, emotionless. You, come to fire me again? I didn't fire you. May I come in? No. Victoria took a breath. This was the moment. Either she walked away and let him disappear back into the invisible margins of the city, or she said the words that would change both their lives. I know about Lily. James froze. The door remained motionless for 3 heartbeats. Then something shifted in his expression. Protective rage twisting his features as he yanked the door fully open. I know she needs valve replacement surgery. I know state insurance denied the procedure at Mount Sinai because they classify it as elective until oxygen saturation drops below 80%. I know you're working 3 jobs trying to pay for medications out of pocket. She'd expected anger, threats maybe, demands that she leave. Instead, James just looked exhausted. The rage drained away as quickly as it had surfaced, leaving only crushing weariness. Come in. Try not to touch anything. Might catch something. The apartment was smaller than Victoria's walk-in closet. Single room serving as kitchen, living area, and bedroom. But it was meticulously clean despite the poverty. Everything organized with military precision. A twin bed in one corner, child-sized, with a medical-grade oxygen concentrator humming beside it. The girl sleeping there had pale skin and dark circles that matched her father's, a nasal cannula delivering supplemental oxygen. Lily, 7 years old and already intimately familiar with mortality. The kitchen table was covered in medical journals, market analysis reports printed on cheap library paper, spiral notebooks filled with handwritten equations that Victoria recognized as advanced quantitative modeling. James hadn't just been watching the markets, he'd been analyzing them, building algorithms, maintaining skills that apparently didn't atrophy even under crushing poverty. James poured water into a glass with tap that sputtered. "What do you want, Ms. Sterling?" Victoria made herself look at him, at the brilliant man broken by love and loss and a system designed to grind people like him into dust. "I made $420 million shorting Skyborn after you left that boardroom." The lie came easily. She needed to see his reaction, needed to understand what kind of man she was dealing with. James didn't even blink. "Congratulations, buy another yacht." Not greed then, not even resentment, just profound indifference to money that couldn't solve the only problem that mattered to him. Victoria abandoned the probe. "I want to hire you. Head of Quantitative Strategy at Titan Capital. Salary $525,000 annually. $2 million signing bonus paid immediately. Full benefits package with comprehensive medical coverage for immediate family members. 0 deductibles, 0 waiting periods. Mount Sinai can schedule Lily's surgery next week." James's grip on the water glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. He stared at her, not speaking, probably running calculations in that extraordinary mind. Surgery costs, medication, recovery, the difference between his daughter slowly suffocating and his daughter playing soccer like a normal child. But when he spoke, his voice shook with something other than gratitude. "Why? I'm a has-been. Haven't actively traded in 5 years. The industry considers me volatile and emotionally unreliable. Why would someone like you hire someone like me?" Victoria stepped closer, deliberately invading his personal space. She needed him to understand that this wasn't charity. "You identified a thermal anomaly that would have bankrupted my firm in approximately 6 seconds of analysis. My team consists of pedigree graduates who can recite textbooks verbatim but couldn't smell blood in the water if they were drowning in it. I don't need show dogs, James. I need a wolf." "I'm not a wolf anymore." The words came out broken. "I'm a father. That world destroys people. It takes everything." "It takes everything if you lose." She let steel enter her voice. "But if you win, it gives everything back tenfold. Look at her, James. Can you afford pride right now? Can you afford to play noble martyr while your daughter waits for life-saving surgery that you could authorize with a single signature?" The blow landed. She saw it hit, saw him flinch like she'd struck him physically. It was brutal, manipulative. Exactly the kind of ruthless calculation that had made her successful and kept her isolated. But it was also true. James closed his eyes. In the corner, Lily coughed in her sleep, a wet rattling sound that spoke of fluid in lungs and airways that couldn't get enough oxygen. The medical alarm on her concentrator beeped softly, showing saturation at 87%. When James opened his eyes again, something had changed. The predator she'd glimpsed in the boardroom flickered back to life behind the exhaustion. "One condition. Name it." I don't report to Michael Hartford. I don't report to Christopher Cooper. I answer only to you, and I have authority to terminate anyone who interferes with my work." Victoria's smile was genuine for the first time in the conversation. "Deal. Office Monday, 6 a.m. sharp. Wear a suit." "I don't own a suit anymore." She reached into her purse, extracted an envelope thick with cash, tossed it onto the scarred kitchen table where it landed among the medical journals and equations. "Get one." She turned to leave, paused at the door. "And James, what you did in that boardroom wasn't luck, it was genius. Don't waste it cleaning floors anymore." The door closed behind her. Victoria descended the stairs carefully, mindful of missing handrails and cracked steps. She climbed into the back of her car where her driver waited, gave him an address in Midtown. Only when the South Bronx had disappeared behind her did she allow herself to fully process what she'd just done. She'd hired a man she'd known for less than a week, offered him a senior position based on a single display of insight, and tied Titan Capital's future to someone the industry had written off as damaged goods. Her board would be furious. Michael would object strenuously. Christopher would probably stage some kind of minor rebellion. Victoria found she didn't care. She'd built her career on trusting her instincts, on seeing value where others saw only risk. James Wright represented the biggest gamble of her life. She pulled out her phone, sent a text to her executive assistant. "Emergency board meeting Monday 5 a.m. Attendance mandatory. Topic, new hire approval." Then she opened her email, found the message from Mount Sinai Hospital's billing department that had arrived earlier that week. A follow-up on a consultation she'd had months ago about creating an executive health program for Titan's senior staff. She hit reply, began typing. "I need to add a dependent to our coverage. 7-year-old female, congenital heart valve defect, requires immediate surgical intervention. Attach her to my personal policy effective immediately and schedule her surgery for next available slot. Cost is not a concern. Confirm receipt." Send. Victoria Sterling stared out at Manhattan sliding past, at the city she'd conquered through sheer force of will, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone who understood what it meant to fight when everything was on the line. Someone who'd already lost everything and somehow still had the courage to keep moving forward. Someone who might actually be capable of standing beside her instead of behind her. Monday morning would tell. Monday morning, 7:15 a.m. James Wright stepped off the elevator onto Titan Capital's 47th floor wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit that fit like it had been engineered specifically for his frame. The transformation was surgical. Sharp haircut from a barber who actually understood bone structure, Oliver Peoples glasses that made him look like he'd stepped out of a finance magazine cover shoot, shoes polished to mirror brightness. He moved through the trading floor with the quiet confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before, who belonged in rooms where fortunes were made and destroyed before most people finished their morning coffee. The trading floor didn't go silent. It went cold. A junior analyst near the coffee station froze mid-pour, whispering to his colleague with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for witnessing traffic accidents. "That's the janitor. I swear to God, that's the guy who emptied my trash last Wednesday." The whisper carried. Heads turned. 23 pairs of eyes tracked James's progress across the floor, each person processing the cognitive dissonance of seeing the invisible made visible, the servant transformed into something that looked uncomfortably like a threat to their comfortable hierarchy. Michael Hartford materialized from a conference room, flanked by Christopher Cooper and 3 VPs who'd clearly been briefed on this morning's ambush. They formed a wall of expensive wool and territorial aggression, blocking the path to the corner offices. Michael's sneer carried all the warmth of January in Chicago. "You're lost, friend. Service entrance is in the back, unless you're delivering lunch." James stopped walking, adjusted his cufflinks with deliberate slowness. Let the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable before meeting Michael's eyes with an expression of absolute devastating boredom. "Good morning, Michael. Victoria asked me to review the emerging markets portfolio before opening bell. If you could move, you're blocking my office." Christopher actually laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "Your office? We converted the supply closet to a break room if you'd like to sit there. I'm sure you'll find it familiar." The cruelty landed exactly as intended. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Others smirked, enjoying the blood sport of watching someone who'd briefly risen above their station get shoved back down where they belonged. Victoria's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel through skin. "Actually, I gave him Christopher's office." She stood in her doorway holding an espresso, immaculate in Armani that probably cost more than Christopher's monthly salary. Her expression suggested she was discussing quarterly projections, rather than detonating a bomb in her own firm's power structure. Christopher's jaw actually dropped. "What? Victoria, I've been with this firm for 6 years." Victoria's eyes went arctic. "And in 6 years, your portfolio has underperformed the S&P 500 by 2.3%. Pack your belongings, Christopher. You're moving to the bullpen. James, inside. We have work to do." The dismissal was absolute. Christopher stood frozen, face cycling through shock to humiliation to impotent rage. The VP stepped aside, suddenly very interested in their phones. Michael's expression curdled into something darker, more calculating. James walked past them without a word, paused as he drew level with Michael, leaned close enough that only the COO could hear. "Incidentally, you have a coffee stain on your lapel. Might want that cleaned. I know an excellent service." Michael's face flushed scarlet. James continued into the glass-walled corner office, Christopher's former domain, and closed the door with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. The first week became a war conducted through spreadsheets and sabotage. They excluded James from critical email chains, forcing him to reconstruct information from fragments and inference. Corrupted his data files with subtle errors that would have been catastrophic if he hadn't caught them during triple checking he did out of paranoid habit. Placed internal betting pools on when he'd crack, when Victoria would realize her mistake, when the janitor would go back to mopping floors where he belonged. Called him the janitor behind his back and Mr. Clean to his face, always with smiles sharp enough to draw blood. James ignored all of it, worked with noise-canceling headphones feeding Chopin nocturnes directly into his brain. Eyes scanning 4 monitors displaying cascading rivers of market data. His hands moved across keyboards with the fluid precision of a concert pianist, building models and algorithms and analyses that were rusty around the edges but fundamentally sound. Rusty, yes. But instinct doesn't die. It's like riding a bicycle on fire, moving 200 miles per hour downhill blindfolded through a minefield. Eventually you remember which way to lean. Wednesday afternoon, 2:17 p.m. Breaking news erupted across every screen simultaneously. The kind of development that made traders' hearts race and executives start calculating exposure before their conscious minds fully processed what they were seeing. Military coup in Democratic Republic of Congo. Lithium mining operations threatened. Lithium prices spiked violently upward. The metal had become modern civilization's most critical resource. Every electric vehicle, every phone, every battery backup system depended on steady lithium supply. Congo controlled significant deposits. Coup meant instability. Instability meant supply disruption. Supply disruption meant prices going vertical. The trading floor exploded into controlled chaos. Michael Hartford rallied the troops with the enthusiasm of a general who'd just spotted an undefended flank. Buy mining stocks, Albemarle, SQM, Livent, buy everything tied to lithium production. Analysts hammered keyboards, executing buy orders in the millions. The room crackled with the electric anticipation of profits appearing like magic on screens, numbers climbing higher with each refresh. Supply chain's choking. Prices are going to the moon. Christopher high-fived a junior analyst who'd just locked in a position. We're up 6% in 10 minutes. This is beautiful. In his glass office, James wasn't watching stock prices. He stared at satellite weather feeds showing the South Atlantic Ocean. A massive tropical cyclone was forming off the Angolan coast, the kind of system that meteorologists gave ominous names and shipping companies routed around at considerable expense. His other screen showed Shanghai Metals Exchange volume data, ticking steadily upward in a pattern he recognized from years of watching Chinese strategic reserve deployments. He grabbed his phone, called Victoria's direct line. "Stop them!" Her voice came back skeptical. "James, we're up 68 million in 12 minutes. Everyone's buying. It's a trap. Look at weather patterns in the South Atlantic." A pause. The sound of keystrokes. "I see the cyclone. Ships will be delayed. That drives prices higher, not lower." James's voice stayed level, but urgency bled through at the edges. "The coup is localized to northern provinces. Southern mines remain operational. The real problem is weather. That cyclone means all bulk carrier ships are stuck in port. They physically cannot leave. Creates inventory glut at the docks, not supply shortage. Inventory glut doesn't drive prices up." "Exactly. China maintains a 75,000-ton strategic lithium reserve they've been waiting to deploy. When prices spike this high, when Western markets panic, China releases reserves and undercuts every mining company simultaneously. Crashes the market while buying up distressed assets at fire sale prices. They executed this exact play in 2019 with rare earth elements. Cost 3 hedge funds everything they had." He pulled up the Shanghai Exchange data, forwarded it to her screen. "Look at volume. They're preparing the dump right now. Positioning for maximum impact." Through the glass, he could see Victoria on her phone, pulling up the data he'd sent. Her expression shifted from skepticism to calculation to something approaching alarm. On the trading floor, Michael was pouring Titan's liquidity into positions that would be worthless in minutes. "If you're wrong, we missed the biggest rally of the year." Her voice had gone quiet, the tone she used when making decisions that would define careers. "I look foolish for listening to you again." James looked at the framed photo he'd placed on his desk that morning. Lily in her hospital gown, giving a thumbs up to the camera despite the IV lines and monitoring equipment. The surgery was scheduled for Thursday. If Titan Capital imploded, the insurance evaporated, the surgery got canceled, and his daughter went back to slowly suffocating while bureaucrats debated medical necessity. "If I'm right, and you don't stop them, Titan Capital is insolvent by lunch." 10 seconds of silence. The weight of $4 billion in assets balanced against the word of a man she'd known for less than a week. Victoria hit the PA system button. "This is Sterling. Freeze all buy orders on mining stocks, effective immediately." The trading floor stopped like someone had yanked the power. Analysts froze mid-keystroke. Phones dangled forgotten. Every eye turned toward the executive offices where Victoria stood visible through her glass wall. Michael's voice carried pure disbelief. "Victoria, have you lost your mind? We're missing the rally of the decade. Freeze it. Liquidate current positions. Go short on mining stocks. Now!" Michael threw his headset across the room hard enough to crack the plastic casing against a monitor. "This is financial suicide. I won't do it!" Victoria appeared in her doorway, and something in her expression made even Michael's righteous fury falter. She looked like winter personified, like every warm human emotion had been flash-frozen and discarded as unnecessary weight. "Then you're terminated, Michael. Short the damn stocks." The analysts moved, terrified of Victoria's wrath, confused by the sudden reversal, but obedient to the chain of command that had been drilled into them since their first day. They sold positions, placed short orders, watched in mounting horror as their screens showed Titan Capital actively betting against the rally that was still climbing, still printing money for every other firm on Wall Street. Down 15 million, Christopher's voice cracked. 30 million. Victoria, stop this madness. James sat motionless in his office, eyes locked on the Shanghai exchange ticker. Waiting. Every second felt like drowning, like the universe was testing whether he'd lost his touch completely, whether grief and poverty had broken the part of his brain that used to see patterns in chaos. Chopin played in his headphones, markets screamed on his screens, his hands stayed perfectly still. Wait for it. The screen snapped to a different color, red turning to urgent crimson as breaking news banners multiplied across financial feeds worldwide. Breaking. China releases 75,000 tons lithium reserves to stabilize global markets. Prices crash. Lithium futures didn't just fall, they evaporated. Mining stocks that had been climbing toward the stratosphere reversed course. With sickening violence, plummeting faster than algorithms could process. Vertical red lines appeared on every trading screen as the largest mining companies on Earth lost billions in market capitalization. But Titan Capital had shorted the sector. Every dollar the market lost became a dollar they made, profits accumulating with the same sickening speed that had been destroying value seconds before. An analyst's voice, high and thin with disbelief. Up 70 million, 140 million, 220. Michael stood frozen at the center of the trading floor, watching competitor firms implode on his screens. 3 major hedge funds just became cautionary tales. Pension funds that had chased the rally watched retirement savings vaporize. But Titan Capital, alone among major players, rode the wave like surfers who'd somehow known exactly when to turn. The closing bell rang at 4 p.m. Final tally appeared on the main board. Net profit, $438 million. The floor went silent with the particular quality of awe reserved for witnessing the impossible made real. Every trader, every analyst, every VP who'd spent the week making James's life miserable turned slowly toward the glass office in the corner. James removed his headphones, stood, walked out of his office with the same measured pace he'd used entering the building that morning. Past stunned faces, past Christopher who looked like he'd been physically struck, past Michael Hartford who'd gone the color of old milk. He stopped beside Michael, looked down at the spot on the floor where they were standing. I believe you missed a spot. Walked to Victoria, who leaned against her desk with adrenaline flushing her cheeks, eyes more alive than he'd seen them. For just a moment, something passed between them that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with recognition. 2 people who understood what it meant to see patterns nobody else could see, to bet everything on being right when the world insisted you were wrong. Not bad for first week. James checked his watch. Hospital visiting hours end at 6. Lily's waiting. Victoria nodded. Take the company car. She paused. And James, thank you for trusting me back. His smile was slight but genuine. You gave me reason to. The company car, a black Mercedes with a driver who treated James with careful deference, delivered him to Mount Sinai by 5:45. He found Lily in her pre-op room, coloring a picture of a unicorn while Maggie Rodriguez sat knitting in the corner chair. Lily looked up when he entered, face lighting up despite the IV lines and monitoring equipment. Daddy, look, I made you a picture. James crossed to her bedside, accepted the drawing like it was priceless art. It's beautiful, princess. Is this the unicorn we saw in that book? Yes. And look, I gave it rainbow wings because unicorns should be able to fly if they want to. The oxygen monitor beside her bed showed saturation at 92%. Higher than it had been in weeks. The pre-op medications were helping, clearing airways and preparing her small body for the surgery that would either fix everything or... He didn't let himself finish that thought. Dr. Robert Hayes appeared in the doorway, reviewing charts on a tablet. 52 years old, chief of pediatric cardiology, the best in his field. The kind of specialist who normally had waiting lists measured in months, but had somehow found a slot for Thursday morning. "Mr. Wright, Ms. Rodriguez, could I speak with you both in the hallway?" James's stomach clenched. Nothing good ever started with doctors asking to speak in hallways. He kissed Lily's forehead, told her he'd be right back, followed Hayes and Maggie into the corridor. Hayes pulled up imaging on his tablet, showed them Lily's heart in cross-section rendered with the eerie clarity of modern medical technology. "The valve defect is exactly where we expected. Good news is there's no additional complications. No septal defects, no arterial malformations. Surgery Thursday morning should be straightforward. 3 hours, maybe 4, depending on how the initial repair holds. And recovery? 6 weeks monitored, then gradually increasing activity. If everything goes well, and I see no reason it shouldn't, she'll be playing soccer by Christmas." The image hit James with physical force. Lily running, Lily breathing without mechanical assistance, Lily living like normal children lived, unburdened by the weight of defective biology. "Thank you, Dr. Hayes. Thank whoever secured this insurance approval. Normally these cases take months to clear. Yours came through in 48 hours with a note that cost was explicitly not a concern." Hayes smiled slightly. "I've been doing this 26 years, never seen that before." He departed, leaving James and Maggie alone in the fluorescent-lit corridor. Maggie patted his arm with gnarled fingers. "God is good, mijo. He sends angels when we need them most." James thought about Victoria Sterling, Ice Queen CEO who'd mocked him for sport, then hired him against all logic, then apparently used her personal influence to expedite insurance approval that would have taken months through normal channels. Angel wasn't the word he'd use, but maybe something close. Friday evening, Victoria had sent a text that afternoon. "Dinner tonight, my choice of venue. Consider it a debrief on the week." The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't have prices on menus, where reservation lists stretched months into the future for normal people, but somehow always had a table for Victoria Sterling. Private booth in the back, low amber lighting, the kind of space designed for conversations that needed discretion. James arrived exactly on time, still in his work suit but tie loosened, jacket over one arm. Found Victoria already seated, reviewing something on her phone with the focused intensity she brought to everything. She looked up when he approached, gestured to the seat across from her. "I took the liberty of ordering wine. Hope you don't mind. I don't drink much anymore." He settled into the leather booth, noticed the bottle was already breathing, something French and probably older than he was. "But I can make an exception." The waiter appeared, poured with practiced efficiency, disappeared like smoke. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the week's chaos settling into something resembling perspective. Victoria broke the quiet first. "The board wants to give you a formal commendation for the lithium play. Public recognition, bonus structure, the works." "I'd prefer they didn't." Her eyebrow lifted fractionally. "Most people enjoy recognition. Most people didn't spend 3 years being invisible." James rotated the wine glass between his fingers, watching light refract through the red liquid. "The second I become public, the second my name appears in financial media, someone's going to recognize me. Someone's going to remember Phoenix, and then I become the story instead of the work." Victoria considered that, nodded slowly. "I can keep you out of press releases, but eventually people will know. You can't hide brilliance forever." "I'm not trying to hide it. I'm trying to protect it." He met her eyes. "Lily's surgery is Thursday. Once she recovers, once I know she's safe, then we can discuss public profiles and commendations. Until then, I need to be nobody special. Just another quant who got lucky." Something shifted in Victoria's expression, the Ice Queen facade cracking enough to reveal the person underneath. "You really did give up everything for her. For them." Sarah made me promise. The words came easier than he expected. Maybe it was the wine, or the exhaustion, or the simple fact that Victoria was the first person in years who seemed to actually see him as something other than a cautionary tale. Take care of our little girl, those were her last coherent words. Everything else was morphine and confusion, but that came through crystal clear. I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be sorry for loss, be sorry for waste. James took a careful sip of wine that tasted like liquid history. I wasted 2 years refusing to see what was happening. Convinced myself the next treatment would work, the next specialist would have answers. Spent a fortune buying time that couldn't be bought. By the time I accepted the inevitable, I'd burned through everything and gained nothing but 18 extra months of watching someone I loved die by degrees. The confession hung in the air between them. Victoria's hand moved across the table, briefly covered his. Not romantic. The gesture was too clean, too businesslike for that. But connection. Understanding forged in the particular crucible of losing people who mattered. 6 years ago, Harrison Blake was my father's partner and my mentor. Her voice had gone distant, reciting facts to avoid feeling them. Taught me everything about finance, about reading markets, about playing the game at the highest levels. My father trusted him completely. James waited, let the silence give her space to continue. Harrison systematically stole our clients over 18 months. Proprietary trading strategies my father had spent decades developing. Recruited our best analysts, our key relationships, then launched a competing firm and left us bankrupt. She pulled her hand back, wrapped both around her wine glass like she needed something to anchor to. My father Richard had a heart attack 3 months later. Died in the ambulance before they could get him to the hospital. Doctors said the stress was a major contributing factor. That's why you went after Skyborn so aggressively. Harrison Blake owns 40% of Skyborn Defense. Sits on their board, acquires them, I acquire leverage over him. A cold smile touched her lips. Thanks to you, I dodged a bullet and he's under SEC investigation. Poetic justice has a certain appeal. Revenge is expensive. Trust me, I've run the calculations. Victoria's laugh was unexpected. Genuine rather than social, the kind that actually reached her eyes. Is that James Wright the philosopher, or James Wright the quant? Both. Neither. Mostly just a man who's made enough mistakes to recognize the shape they take. He leaned back against the leather, suddenly aware of how comfortable this felt, sitting across from someone who understood the weight of loss, who'd rebuilt from ruin, who knew what it meant to keep fighting when surrender would be easier. Their food arrived. They ate and talked. Conversation ranging from market analysis to Lily's recovery timeline to Victoria's ongoing war with her board over strategic direction. The wine bottle emptied. James found himself laughing at Victoria's savage deconstruction of a competitor's failed merger. Found her actually smiling when he described Lily's insistence that unicorns should obviously have rainbow wings. Across the street, parked in shadow where the restaurant's lights didn't reach, Michael Hartford sat in his sedan taking photographs with a camera phone. Zoom lens capturing the intimate booth, the wine, the moment when Victoria's hand briefly touched James's. Building a file, constructing a narrative. Because Michael Hartford had secrets worth $52 million, and James Wright was getting dangerously close to the accounting systems that would expose them. The lithium play had proven James wasn't lucky. He was legitimately brilliant, the kind of analyst who could smell irregularities in data the way sharks smelled blood. Michael's son David was in remission now. The experimental leukemia treatment had worked, bought with money stolen from Titan Capital and laundered through Cayman accounts that Michael had thought were perfectly hidden. But James's new auditing algorithms were tightening the net, getting closer to the discrepancies that would unravel everything. Michael needed James gone. Not just fired, destroyed, credibility shattered, reputation demolished, Victoria's trust exploded beyond any possibility of repair. He had 48 hours to make it happen. Monday morning, Gary Morrison delivered his report in a dive bar in the Lower East Side where lighting was dim enough that facial recognition would struggle. Ex-NYPD detective turned professional problem solver, the kind of man who understood that certain questions were better answered in cash than through official channels. Michael slid an envelope across the scarred table. "Tell me you found something." Gary pulled out a tablet, called up files he'd assembled through methods that wouldn't bear close examination. James writes clean. No criminal record, no scandals, no affairs, no substance abuse. Guy's lived like a monk since his wife died. Works, goes home to his kid, repeat. That's not helpful. But Gary's smile had teeth. His network security is garbage. Home Wi-Fi is basic consumer grade, no VPN, password so simple my software cracked it in 40 seconds. And Titan Capital's employee laptop policy leaves USB ports unsecured. Understanding dawned across Michael's face. You can plant evidence. I can plant whatever narrative you want. Wire transfers to offshore accounts. Stolen proprietary algorithms sold to competitors. IP logs showing it originated from his home network. Make it look like he's been running a side business selling Titan's secrets since the day he got hired. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out a second envelope, this one considerably thicker. 50,000 now. Another 50 when it's done. I need this airtight SEC investigation proof FBI admissible evidence level. When do you need it? Tomorrow. Victoria's taking the board out for dinner Tuesday night. I need to discover the breach, lock down his systems, call the authorities before she gets back. Create a situation where she's forced to act before she has time to think. Gary pocketed the money. Consider it done. Tuesday morning, James arrived at his office to find the atmosphere subtly different. Analysts who'd spent weeks treating him like contaminated furniture now nodded greetings. Christopher Cooper actually held a door open. The hostility had transformed into something approaching wary respect, the way predators acknowledged another predator who'd proven they belonged in the territory. Victoria stopped by his office mid-morning, holding coffee she'd brought from the executive break room. "Board dinner tonight. Annual tradition where I spend 3 hours listening to them complain about risk management while eating overpriced steak." She set the coffee on his desk, black, 2 sugars, exactly how he'd been drinking it all week. She'd noticed. "You're officially invited, though I can't promise it'll be enjoyable." "I should probably pass. Lily's got her pre-op appointment this afternoon." "How's she doing?" "Nervous, excited. Keeps asking if she'll be able to play soccer after." His throat tightened slightly. "I keep telling her yes, trying to make it sound confident." Victoria's expression softened in a way he was learning to recognize. The Ice Queen allowing herself brief moments of humanity before rebuilding the walls. "She'll be fine. Hayes is the best there is." "I know. Doesn't make waiting easier." She lingered in his doorway like she wanted to say something else but hadn't quite found the words. Finally settled on, "Call me after the appointment, let me know how it goes." "That's not really in my job description." "Consider it a personal request then, from someone who gives a damn." She left before he could respond. James stared at the coffee she'd brought, at the casual intimacy of knowing how someone took their coffee after a single week, at the way Victoria Sterling kept finding small ways to show she saw him as more than just an asset on her balance sheet. It felt dangerous, like standing on the edge of a cliff in high wind, where one wrong step would send everything tumbling into the abyss. The pre-op appointment went well. Dr. Hayes reviewed Lily's charts, pronounced her ready for Thursday's surgery, gave James a list of pre-surgical instructions that mostly involved keeping her calm and making sure she didn't eat after midnight. Lily charmed the nursing staff with her unicorn drawings and questions about whether she could have rainbow stitches. James took her for ice cream after, let her order whatever she wanted despite it being close to dinner time. Sat across from her in the booth while she demolished a sundae bigger than her head. chocolate smeared around her mouth, eyes bright with the kind of uncomplicated joy that made his chest ache. "Daddy, after my heart is fixed, can I join a soccer team?" "Absolutely. We'll find the best team in the city. And you'll come to my games?" "I promise. Front row, every single game." Lily went quiet for a moment, pushing ice cream around with her spoon. "Mommy would have liked that. She always said you work too much." The grief hit him sideways, unexpected and sharp. "She was right. I did work too much. But you stopped. When she got sick, you stopped working and stayed with us." Lily looked up at him with eyes too old for 7 years. "That was good, Daddy. That was the right thing." James reached across the table, took her small hand in his. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Lily Wright. You and your mother. Everything else is just noise." They finished their ice cream, went home to their tiny apartment. James tucked her in, read her favorite story about unicorns and dragons, kissed her forehead while the oxygen concentrator hummed its mechanical lullaby. He stepped into the hallway, pulled out his phone, sent Victoria a text. "Pre-op went well. Surgery still on for Thursday, 7 a.m. Lily asked if she can have rainbow stitches." The response came within seconds. "I'll make sure Hayes has rainbow thread ready. Sleep well." James stared at the message, at the casual warmth bleeding through Victoria's typically professional communication. Wondered what it meant that they'd gone from boardroom antagonists to something resembling friendship in the span of a week. Decided he was too tired to analyze it properly. Wednesday morning, 2:17 a.m. Michael Hartford sat in his home office watching Gary Morrison's remote access software do its work. Lines of code scrolled across his screen as fabricated evidence planted itself into James Wright's laptop, into Titan Capital's network logs, into offshore account records that would lead investigators on a trail ending directly at James's front door. Wire transfer, $5 million to account registered to James M. Wright, Cayman Islands. IP logs showing the transfer originated from James's home network. Encrypted files containing Titan's proprietary trading algorithms, dates stamped from the week James started, email chains that had never existed, conversations between James and a fictional Hong Kong investment firm, negotiations for selling trade secrets. It was beautiful, comprehensive, the kind of evidence that would hold up under forensic accounting scrutiny because it was technically real. Actual transfers, actual files, actual network traffic. Just attributed to the wrong person through careful manipulation of routing data and timestamps. Michael's phone buzzed. Text from Gary. "Package delivered. Trigger whenever you're ready." Michael poured himself 3 fingers of scotch, drank it in one burning swallow. Thought about his son David sleeping peacefully upstairs, cancer-free because of money Michael had stolen. Thought about Rebecca, who didn't know her husband was a criminal. Thought about how far a man would go to protect what mattered. Decided the answer was whatever it takes. He picked up his phone, dialed Titan Capital's security chief. "This is Hartford. I need you in the office immediately. We have a potential data breach." The machinery of destruction ground into motion. Wednesday morning, 10:43 a.m. James stood before Titan Capital's board of directors presenting his acquisition strategy for a distressed biotech firm trading at 30% of book value. The analysis was bulletproof, 18 slides documenting market inefficiency, patent valuations, and projected returns that made Christopher Cooper's previous work look like undergraduate homework. Victoria watched from the head of the table with something approaching pride in her expression. The board members, 11 men and women whose collective net worth exceeded small nations, leaned forward with genuine interest, asking questions that James fielded with the casual expertise of someone who'd been doing this since before most of them had gray hair. Rumors had circulated all week, whispers about dinner at exclusive restaurants, about Victoria's unprecedented move giving James a senior position, about how the Ice Queen seemed to thaw slightly whenever the former janitor entered a room. Nothing concrete, nothing actionable, Just the low hum of office politics trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. The boardroom doors exploded inward. Two NYPD officers in uniform flanked a federal agent wearing tactical vest with FBI emblazoned across the chest. Behind them, Michael Hartford stood with an expression of carefully constructed concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. The lead officer's voice cut through the presentation like a blade through silk. "James Wright?" Every head turned. James stopped mid-sentence, laser pointer still aimed at a slide showing 3-year revenue projections. Something cold and terrible crawled up his spine. "Yes? We have a warrant for your arrest." The room erupted. Victoria shot to her feet so fast her chair toppled backward, the crash echoing like a gunshot. "What is the meaning of this?" The FBI agent stepped forward, pulling handcuffs from his belt with practiced efficiency. "Grand larceny and corporate espionage. We received an anonymous tip with substantial evidence suggesting Mr. Wright has been selling Titan Capital's proprietary trading algorithms to a rival firm in Hong Kong." The words hit James like physical blows. His vision tunneled. The presentation room, these people, this moment became surreal, dreamlike in its wrongness. "That's a complete lie!" His voice came out louder than intended, echoing off glass and steel. "I have never—" Michael's interjection carried perfect notes of reluctant betrayal. "We discovered the wire transfers on your laptop, James. I personally verified the security logs this morning after our system flagged suspicious activity. $5 million wired to an offshore account registered in your name. The IP address matches your home Wi-Fi in the Bronx." James lunged toward Michael, pure instinct, pure rage, the need to put his hands around the throat of whoever had done this, overwhelming every rational thought. The officers caught him mid-stride, slammed him face down onto the mahogany conference table hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. His cheek pressed against polished wood. Hands wrenched behind his back, cuffs clicked shut with terrible finality. "You planted it!" The words came out strangled by the pressure on his back. "You framed me!" Victoria's scream carried genuine anguish. "James, stop!" She looked at Michael, and James could see her mind working through the implications, processing evidence against the man she'd known for a week versus the man who'd been her COO for 5 years. Saw doubt creep into her expression like poison into water. "Michael, show me those logs, now!" Michael produced a tablet with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. Handed it to Victoria while maintaining his mask of professional regret. The evidence was comprehensive. Wire transfer confirmation showing $5 million moved through a labyrinth of shell companies before landing in a Cayman Islands account registered to James M. Wright. Network logs timestamped to his laptop's unique identifier. IP address matching the cheap router in his South Bronx apartment. Encrypted files containing Titan's most valuable proprietary algorithms, accessed and copied during hours when James had been alone in his office. Victoria's hands shook slightly as she scrolled through the documentation. Her face had gone pale, emotions warring across features that usually showed nothing but calculated control. She looked at James, handcuffed, face pressed against the table, desperation in his eyes, and he watched her make the calculation. Watched her weigh the man who'd saved her firm against the data that said he'd been systematically robbing it. Watched her choose. "Tell me you didn't do this." The whisper barely reached him over the ringing in his ears. James met her gaze, willing her to see truth, to remember who he was beneath the manufactured evidence. "I didn't. Victoria, look at me. I didn't do it. He's framing me. You have to believe—" But he could see it happening, the poisonous seed of doubt taking root. She remembered his desperation, the crushing medical debt, the daughter who needed surgery that cost more than most people made in years. She remembered how ruthlessly he'd dismantled Skyborn, the surgical precision with which he'd predicted the lithium crash. Could someone that desperate, that brilliant, have been running a long con from the beginning? Using her, using Titan, extracting value while pretending to add it? The data said yes, the evidence said guilty, and Victoria Sterling had built her career on trusting data over instinct. She hesitated, just for a moment, just long enough. In that hesitation, Michael Hartford won. "Take him away." The officers hauled James upright. He didn't fight. What was the point? Just looked at Victoria one last time, let her see the betrayal in his eyes, the devastation of someone who'd finally started to trust again, only to have that trust shattered. Elevator doors closed on his face. The board sat in shocked silence. Michael straightened his tie, fell seamlessly into crisis management mode. "I'll coordinate with legal and PR, frame this as isolated incident, rogue employee, standard security protocols caught it before real damage occurred. We can contain this." Victoria stared at the empty doorway where James had disappeared. Her hands had gone numb. Everything felt distant, muffled, like she was underwater watching events through layers of distortion. Her gut screamed that this was wrong, that James Wright, the man who'd sacrificed everything for love, who worked 3 jobs for his daughter, who'd saved Victoria's firm for no reason except it was the right thing to do, wasn't capable of this kind of calculated betrayal. But the data said otherwise, and she'd built everything on trusting data over emotion. She closed her eyes. A single tear traced down her cheek before she could stop it. When the data says one thing but your heart screams another, which do you trust? The 19th Precinct holding cell smelled like industrial cleaner trying to mask decades of human misery. James sat on the steel bench, head buried in hands, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead with the maddening inconsistency of failing ballasts. 6 hours since his arrest, 6 hours of processing, fingerprinting, photographing, the machinery of justice grinding him into the system's permanent record. 6 hours of his mind racing through scenarios, searching for the angle, the flaw, the way Michael had pulled this off. The technical details kept circling. IP address spoofing was easy enough. Basic VPN work, route traffic through James's home network, make it look like he'd originated the transfers. But the account itself? That required actual documentation, banking records, signatures that looked authentic enough to pass financial scrutiny. Gary Morrison. Had to be. Michael's fixer, the ex-cop who specialized in manufacturing evidence that held up in court. The kind of man who knew which clerks could be bribed, which documents could be forged, which systems had exploitable vulnerabilities. James's phone call had gone to Maggie Rodriguez. He'd lied, told her he was working late on a critical deal, asked her to stay with Lily overnight, couldn't bear the thought of his daughter knowing her father was in jail, couldn't stomach the image of officers explaining to a 7-year-old why Daddy wasn't coming home. Lily's surgery was tomorrow, 7 a.m. Mount Sinai Hospital. Dr. Hayes performing the valve replacement that would determine whether she lived a normal life or continued suffocating by degrees. Without James's job, without Titan's insurance, the surgery would be canceled. Pre-existing condition, elective procedure, all the bureaucratic language that translated to, "Your daughter can die while you fill out forms." He'd failed Sarah, couldn't save her despite spending a fortune, despite sacrificing everything. And now he was going to fail Lily too, going to let her down when she needed him most. Because he'd been stupid enough to trust that the world might finally stop punishing him for having the audacity to care about people. "I'm cursed. Every time I climb out of the pit, the universe shoves me back down." Sarah's cancer, bankruptcy, blacklisting, and now this. Arrested for crimes I didn't commit, my daughter's surgery evaporating. Everything I've fought for disintegrating while I sit in a cage unable to do anything but watch. The heavy steel door at the corridor's end clanked open. Footsteps echoed, not the thud of police boots but the sharp staccato of expensive heels on concrete. The guard's voice carried bored authority. "Right, your lawyer's here." James didn't look up. "I don't have a lawyer, can't afford one. You don't need to afford this one." His head snapped up. Victoria Sterling stood in the holding cell doorway, and James had never seen her look like this. The corporate armor completely stripped away, hair loose around her shoulders, no makeup, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual power suits. She looked exhausted and human and terrified in a way that suggested she hadn't slept since his arrest. Behind her stood a young man James didn't recognize, early 20s, hoodie under a blazer, clutching a laptop like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Victoria!" James's voice came out hoarse from hours of silence and suppressed rage. She stepped into the cell, an impossible image, one of the richest women in New York standing in this concrete box designed to hold the city's discarded humanity, didn't speak immediately, just looked at him with an expression that combined guilt and determination in equal measure. "If you're here to ask where I hid the money, save your breath. I didn't take it. I know you didn't." The words hung between them. James blinked, trying to process the certainty in her voice, the absolute conviction that contradicted everything she'd shown in the boardroom. Victoria gestured to her companion. "This is Kevin Miller. He runs cybersecurity for my private family trust. Doesn't work for Titan, works exclusively for me. I had him analyze the evidence 3 hours after they took you." Kevin set his laptop on the steel bench, fingers already flying across the keyboard. The wire transfer logs were perfect. Professional-grade forgery, the kind that would fool standard forensic accounting. IP address matched your home router, timestamps aligned with your known work sessions. Whoever framed you understood digital evidence protocols. But James heard the hope in his own voice, hated how desperate it sounded. Kevin's smile had teeth. "But they got arrogant. IP spoofing is easy. Route traffic through someone else's network, make it look like they originated the transfer. What they forgot is packet latency analysis. Your apartment has bargain basement DSL service, high latency, slow upload speeds. But the data transfer that sent those algorithm files to the Cayman accounts? Lightning-fast fiber optic speeds with sub-5 millisecond latency." He pulled up network analysis data, showed James graphs and packet traces that told a story of sophisticated forgery undermined by a single technical oversight. "That transfer didn't come from your apartment. It came from a dedicated fiber optic line with enterprise-grade bandwidth." Kevin tapped another key. A map of Manhattan appeared, a pulsing red dot marking a location in the financial district. "Came from inside Titan Capital headquarters, specifically from the hardwired fiber connection in the chief operating officer's private office." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Michael Hartford's office. Michael, who'd been sweating through every interaction for weeks, who'd pushed hardest for Christopher to maintain his position, who'd reacted with disproportionate fury when Victoria ordered the lithium short. "Michael." Victoria's expression had gone arctic. He got sloppy in his desperation. "You were getting close to something with your new auditing protocols, something he needed buried. So he manufactured evidence and called the FBI, gambling that I'd be too angry to check the technical details before the narrative took hold." She looked at James, and guilt cracked through her careful control. "I hesitated. In the boardroom, when you needed me to believe you, I hesitated. For one terrible moment, I doubted you." James stood slowly, crossed the small cell until he was directly in front of her, close enough to see the tears she was fighting to contain. "You came back. That's what matters. I almost didn't." Her voice shook. "I almost let the data override what I knew about you. Almost let Michael destroy you because I was too afraid to trust my instincts. But you did trust them. You're here." He let something soften in his expression, let her see forgiveness he hadn't known he was capable of offering. "You brought Kevin. You found the proof. You came back." Victoria pulled a phone from her pocket, showed him a text exchange. "Michael's at the office right now. He initiated something called Protocol 0 30 minutes ago. Full liquidation of all Titan positions. He's systematically selling everything, crashing the firm to cover his tracks while extracting whatever cash he can move to offshore accounts. James's mind shifted into overdrive, analyzing implications and timelines. Market closes in, he checked the wall clock, 42 minutes. If he completes the liquidation, Titan's finished. Assets sold at fire sale prices, positions closed at massive losses, the firm bankrupt by closing bell. I can freeze his access, but I can't stop what he's already set in motion. Victoria's hand trembled as she extended it toward him. I can stop the hemorrhaging, but I can't catch him, not the way you can. You know the system architecture. You know how to fight algorithms with algorithms. James looked at her outstretched hand, thought about the humiliation of arrest, the handcuffs, the moment she'd chosen data over him. Thought about Michael Hartford's smug expression, the calculated cruelty of framing someone already on the edge of survival. Then thought about Lily. If Titan Capital imploded, the insurance disappeared instantly. The surgery scheduled for tomorrow morning would be canceled before dawn. His daughter would go back to the slow suffocation, the oxygen concentrator's mechanical wheeze, the fear in her eyes when she couldn't catch her breath. He didn't want justice. He wanted complete annihilation. James took Victoria's hand. Get me out of here, and get me a terminal with direct system access. The drive from the 19th precinct to Wall Street was a blur of lights and speed, and Victoria's driver treating traffic laws as polite suggestions rather than requirements. James sat in the back seat beside Kevin, fingers flying across the laptop, pulling up Titan's system architecture, mapping Michael's liquidation algorithm in real time. He's using distributed high-frequency trading protocols to fragment the sell orders, splits each position into thousands of microtransactions to avoid triggering circuit breakers. James's voice had gone clinical, analytical, the part of his brain that saw patterns taking complete control. Brilliant, actually. Evil, but brilliant. Victoria glanced back from the front passenger seat. How long until market close? 37 minutes. He's liquidated 46% of total portfolio value. At current velocity, he'll complete the dump with 8 minutes to spare. Can you stop it? If I block his algorithm now, he'll know we're on to him. He'll shut down the servers, wipe the forensic evidence, and disappear before we can prove anything. James pulled up system access protocols, started writing countercode with the fluid speed of someone who'd spent years building trading algorithms in his sleep. I need to let him think he's winning until the absolute last second. Then I don't stop his algorithm, I invert it. Kevin's eyes widened. Jesus, you're going to make him rob himself. He wants to liquidate Titan's positions and transfer the cash. Fine. I'll route every transaction through his personal liability accounts. Use his own algorithm to buy back our stock at depressed prices, but assign all purchased debt to Michael Hartford personally. By the time he realizes what's happening, he'll own billions in obligations he can't possibly cover. Victoria's expression shifted from worry to something approaching predatory satisfaction. How certain are you this works? 70%, maybe 75%. James met her eyes in the rearview mirror. But we're out of better options, and I'm extremely motivated to see Michael Hartford destroyed. The SUV screeched to a halt in front of Titan Capital's building. They ran through the lobby, Victoria in jeans and sneakers, James still wearing his Tom Ford suit now rumpled from hours in a cell, Kevin clutching his laptop like a shield. Security guards started to challenge them, recognized Victoria, stepped aside. The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt eternal. James watched the floor numbers climb while mentally rehearsing the code he'd need to write, the system vulnerabilities he'd need to exploit, the precise timing required to pull off algorithmic jujitsu at this scale. Victoria's hand found his, squeezed once. Whatever happens, thank you for trying. Thank me after we win. The elevator doors opened on chaos. The trading floor looked like a war zone in the final hours before surrender. Phones rang unanswered. Junior analysts openly wept at their desks. Screens everywhere flashed red as Titan's positions evaporated, assets selling at catastrophic discounts, the firm's capital bleeding out in real time. Michael Hartford stood at the center of the carnage, jacket off, tie loosened, shouting into two phones simultaneously. Playing his role perfectly, devoted COO desperately trying to contain a disaster he'd secretly engineered. Sell everything! I don't care about slippage! Market orders across the board! We're in full emergency liquidation! Victoria's voice cut through the noise like a chainsaw through silk. Michael! He spun around. The performance on his face was Oscar-worthy. Shock, relief, confusion, all perfectly calibrated for someone surprised by the boss's unexpected arrival. Victoria, thank God you're here. It's a catastrophic system failure. The algorithms are auto-selling everything. I've been trying to override, but the janitor must have planted some kind of logic bomb before his arrest. Shut up, Michael. The two words landed with absolute finality. Michael's expression flickered, mask slipping for just a fraction of a second before reasserting itself. We don't have time for this. The firm is going to zero. I said shut up. While Victoria held Michael's attention, James and Kevin moved like ghosts toward the server room. No one noticed them in the chaos, just two more bodies in a crowd of people trying to comprehend the apocalypse unfolding on their screens. The server room door required executive access. Kevin produced a key card, Victoria's personal access, the black card she'd given James his first day. The lock clicked green. They slipped inside, closed the door with a soft sound that somehow felt louder than the screaming chaos outside. Banks of servers hummed with the combined processing power of a small supercomputer. James crossed to the main terminal, plugged in Kevin's laptop, fingers already moving before his conscious mind fully engaged. Michael's algorithm appeared on the screen, thousands of lines of sophisticated code executing the systematic destruction of everything Titan Capital had built. Beautiful in its way, like watching a controlled demolition where every charge was precisely timed for maximum devastation. James started writing, not a kill switch, not a firewall, a mirror. He built a parallel algorithm that shadowed Michael's liquidation protocol, matched it transaction for transaction, but inverted the destination accounts. Where Michael's code sold positions and routed cash toward offshore havens, James's mirror bought back those same positions and assigned the purchase obligations to Michael's personal investment accounts. Every share Michael sold, James bought back and charged to Michael's liability ledger. Every dollar extracted became a dollar owed, compounding with each microtransaction until the debt became impossible, astronomical, civilization ending. Kevin watched over his shoulder, occasionally offering suggestions, mostly just bearing witness to the kind of coding that looked like jazz improvisation by a master who'd transcended technical limitations and was now playing pure instinct. 30 seconds to market close. James's fingers didn't slow. Lines of code scrolled past faster than Kevin could read, each function perfectly nested, each variable optimally assigned, the entire construct building toward a mathematical hammer that would fall with absolute precision. 15 seconds. Final function. Commit. Deploy. James hit enter. On the trading floor, Michael Hartford noticed the screens change. Red cascade of sell orders suddenly frozen mid-execution. His algorithm stopping like someone had yanked its power. What the hell? Then the numbers started turning green. Massive buy orders flooded the system. Not buying stocks, buying debt. Purchasing back every position Michael had sold. Reclaiming every share at the depressed prices his own fire sale had created. But the purchase authorizations weren't routing to Titan Capital's accounts. They were routing to Michael Hartford's personal portfolio. Michael grabbed his phone, pulled up his trading app with shaking hands, watched in real time as his personal liability numbers climbed like they'd caught fire. 10 million, 50 million, 200 million. Accelerating faster than his mind could process, each refresh showing obligations that would take multiple lifetimes to pay. James's voice boomed over the PA system speakers. "Hello, Michael." Every head on the trading floor turned toward the glass-walled server room. James stood visible behind the glass, holding a microphone in one hand, flash drive in the other. Michael's face drained of color. He's supposed to be in jail." James walked out of the server room with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd already won and was simply collecting the spoils. Past frozen traders, past executives who'd spent weeks making his life miserable. Directly toward Michael Hartford, who stood at the center of the trading floor looking like a man watching his execution approach. "You tried to crash this firm to hide your embezzlement. Thought you could frame a desperate ex-con and nobody would question the narrative. Clever plan. Almost worked." Michael backed away, bumped into a desk. "I don't know what you're talking about. Security! Get him out of here!" James stopped 5 feet away. "You forgot the checksum principle. Every digital transaction leaves a signature, a ghost in the system. You wipe the logs linking the embezzlement to you. But I just restored every single one. Transaction records showing $52 million systematically stolen over 18 months. Routing numbers leading directly to your Cayman accounts. Timestamps correlating to your login sessions." He held up the flash drive like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "I've forwarded complete documentation to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the New York Attorney General's office, and, just for fun, your wife Rebecca." The last part hit like a physical blow. Michael's expression crumbled, all pretense abandoned. "My son was dying. The treatment wasn't covered. I was going to pay it back. I just needed time. You had choices. You chose theft. You chose to frame me when I got close to exposing you. You chose to destroy innocent people to save yourself." Michael lunged with the desperation of a man with nothing left to lose. Grabbed a stapler from the desk beside him, swung it at James's head with animal fury. James sidestepped the clumsy attack like it was happening in slow motion. Caught Michael's wrist mid-swing, twisted sharply. Michael howled, forced to his knees by leverage and pressure points James had learned from Sarah's physical therapist during those final months when he'd needed to move her without causing pain. James leaned close, whispered directly into Michael's ear. "That's for the gray jumpsuit." The elevator chimed. FBI agents in tactical gear poured onto the trading floor like a SWAT team hitting a raid target. Lead agent surveyed the scene, spotted Michael on his knees, crossed to him with handcuffs already drawn. "Michael Hartford, you are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." They hauled him upright. Michael was crying now, mascara of the successful executive completely dissolved. "Rebecca, please, the kids, they don't understand." James watched them drag Michael toward the elevator. Felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not revenge, not even the righteous anger that had sustained him through the arrest and the cell and the terrible certainty that he'd failed everyone who mattered. Just exhaustion, and the desperate need to get to Mount Sinai Hospital before visiting hours ended. To see his daughter before the surgery that would determine everything. The elevator doors closed on Michael's face. The trading floor remained frozen in shocked silence. Then Christopher Cooper started clapping. Slow, deliberate applause from the man who'd mocked James most viciously, who'd fought hardest to maintain the old hierarchy. Standing on his desk chair like he was at a sporting event, clapping with genuine appreciation. Another trader joined in, then another. Within seconds, the entire floor erupted. People hugging, papers thrown in celebration, the kind of release that came from being minutes away from unemployment and suddenly delivered into salvation by the person they'd spent weeks treating like contaminated furniture. James stood at the center of the celebration, oddly disconnected from it. These people weren't celebrating him. They were celebrating their own survival, their mortgages remaining paid, their careers continuing. He was just the tool that had delivered the outcome. Victoria approached through the chaos. She wasn't celebrating. Tears tracked down her face, mascara she rarely wore smudged at the corners of her eyes. You saved it. You saved absolutely everything. James shook his head. We saved it, together. You trusted your instincts over the data. That's what made this possible. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the black executive access card, pressed it into his hand with both of hers, like she was delivering something sacred. You're not an employee anymore, James. I'm making you full partner. 50% equity stake, equal ownership. Your name goes on the door beside mine. The words took a moment to penetrate. 50% equity in Titan Capital meant billions. Meant Lily would never worry about medical bills, about insurance coverage, about whether her father could afford to keep her alive. Meant security beyond anything James had imagined when he'd been scrubbing floors and collecting other people's trash. Partner? Equal partner? You and me, rebuilding this firm into something better than what it was. One condition. Which is? Victoria's smile was genuine, reaching her eyes for the first time since he'd met her. You never, ever wear that janitor's uniform again. James matched her smile. Deal. 6 months later, morning sunlight painted the glass facade of 450 Park Avenue in shades of gold and amber. The new bronze lettering above the entrance gleamed like a promise. Sterling and Wright Capital. James sat in his corner office reviewing quarterly projections for the firm's renewable energy fund. The exhaustion lines that had carved trenches in his face were gone, replaced by the quiet confidence of someone who'd survived the worst and come out stronger. He wore success easily now, comfortable in expensive suits, at home in boardrooms where billions moved at his recommendation. His phone buzzed. Video call. He tapped accept. Lily's face filled the screen, grass-stained and breathless and absolutely radiant. Soccer uniform, ponytail slightly askew, standing on a field so green it hurt to look at. Daddy, I scored 3 goals! 3! Coach said I was the star player! The joy in her voice was pure and uncomplicated, the kind only children managed before life taught them about complications and consequences. James felt his throat tighten in the way that still happened whenever he was reminded that she was alive, healthy, running instead of wheezing, playing instead of connected to machines. That's incredible, sweetheart. Did you do the victory dance? Better. I did a cartwheel. Grandma Maggie got it on video. Lily's grin could have powered the eastern seaboard. You're coming to my game on Saturday, right? Front row, just like I promised. Wouldn't miss it for anything. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, Princess. The screen went dark. James stared at it for a long moment, letting himself feel the weight of everything that image represented. Normal childhood, health, a future that extended beyond the next medical crisis. Some equations don't need solving. Some battles are won by simply refusing to surrender. Victoria appeared in his doorway holding 2 file folders and a magazine. She sounded happy. She is happy. Completely normal, completely healthy, everything I prayed for when she was hooked up to oxygen and I was cleaning toilets hoping someone would notice I existed. Victoria crossed to his desk, dropped the magazine in front of him. Time magazine, latest issue. The cover showed James and Victoria standing back to back on the trading floor, a photograph taken during the Michael Hartford aftermath. The headline, The Billionaire and the Janitor, the unlikely partnership that revolutionized Wall Street. They're calling us the power couple of the financial world. Michael's reading this from his federal prison cell. James picked up the magazine, studied the cover image. The lighting makes me look tired. You look dangerous. That's why investors love you. She settled onto the edge of his desk, looking out at the Manhattan sky they'd conquered through sheer refusal to quit. Board meeting in 10 minutes. Final vote on the Skyborn acquisition. After Michael's arrest and the SCEC investigation, Skyborn Defense had collapsed into bankruptcy. Harrison Blake had fled to Monaco before federal marshals could arrest him. The company's assets, including the Aegis guidance system with its fixable flaw, had been available for pennies on the dollar. Sterling and Wright Capital had acquired the whole thing for $800 million. James had already hired aerospace engineers to redesign the chip architecture. The corrected Aegis system would be ready for DoD testing in 6 months. Patent protections ensuring Skyborne, now a Sterling and Wright subsidiary, would dominate military guidance systems for a generation. Full circle. The company that had almost destroyed Victoria was now hers, rebuilt properly, generating returns that would have made her father proud. Ready? James stood, grabbed his jacket, caught his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. Didn't see the desperate janitor anymore. Saw a survivor, a father, a partner. Saw someone who'd lost everything and somehow found the strength to build it all back. Better than before, always. They walked toward the boardroom together. Equal partners, equal survivors, two people who understood that the only equation worth solving was the one that asked, when everything is taken from you, do you surrender or do you fight? They'd both chosen to fight, and they'd won. Later that evening, James sat alone in his office while the city lights twinkled like scattered stars below. Email notification chimed on his computer. He glanced at the screen. Sender, Phoenix_2.0 at encrypted.net. Subject, the student is ready. Are you, teacher? Email body blank except for a single attachment. Algorithm_Phoenix_reborn.ex. James stared at the message. His hand moved toward the mouse, hovered over the delete button. The Phoenix algorithm, the code that had made him legendary, that had predicted Brexit, that had generated fortunes and attracted attention he'd spent years trying to escape. Someone had reconstructed it, or found his original source code, or built something new that carried the same ghost. A test, a temptation, a reminder that the past never stayed buried as completely as you hoped. He thought about Sarah's final words, "Take care of our little girl." Thought about Lily doing cartwheels on soccer fields, healthy and whole and unburdened by the weight of her father's ambitions. James clicked delete, closed the laptop with finality. Some equations don't need solving. Some phoenixes should stay ashes. He grabbed his coat, turned off the office lights, headed home to his daughter. Left the algorithm behind like a ghost he'd finally learned to stop haunting. The screen stayed dark for 3 seconds, then flickered to life. Deleted folder opened itself. File restored from digital grave. Green text scrolled across black background. Initialization sequence complete. Welcome back, Phoenix, awaiting further instructions. The cursor blinked in the darkness, waiting, patient. Some stories end. Some simply pause, gathering strength for what comes next.